Muted, Tori.
Good morning. Thank you for the honor of being here. Tori Berber Salazar, District Attorney, San Joaquin County.
Okay, next, Sheriff Withrow.
Good morning, Mr. Bivens. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Pat Withrow, San Joaquin County Sheriff, and President Bivens, I'm sure glad you're feeling better. You're looking strong, so happy to be here this morning.
Oh, thank you, and I'm glad to be feeling better. Eric Jones, Chief.
Yes.
Stockton Police Department.
Yes. Good morning. Eric Jones, Stockton Police Chief. Pleasure to be here. And thanks for having me.
Okay, and Pastor Trina Turner.
Good morning to the Honorable President Bobby Bivens and the NAACP staff. I'm Pastor Trina Turner. I'm the Executive Director for Faith in the Valley, a local organizing entity that operates in the San Joaquin Central Valley, and local staff pastor of the Victory and Praise Church here in Stockton. Thank you.
Okay, and then we have attorney, civil rights lawyer extraordinaire, Dante Pointer. Would you introduce yourself and give us a brief introduction?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, President Bivens. Happy to be here to join in on a critical conversation. As you mentioned already, I'm a civil rights attorney. I've been practicing civil rights law, and particularly police misconduct cases for the last 16 years in Northern California. I've represented hundreds of people throughout the state of California in that issue.
Okay, thank you very much. And I don't see the bishop at the moment, so we will go on from there. As you know, we have many issues going on in our country, and unfortunately, many people's lives have been lost over the years and generations. So today I want to share a little bit before we start and kind of give a little direction. The Stockton branch NAACP last year presented a 10-point plan on police reform. And today I will read briefly what is from our national office, and it's titled #Police for Now. At any rate, so accountability is one of the major items that the national NAACP and African Americans across the country and others are concerned with. And so our president and CEO put out this piece just yesterday, and the countless victims that have experienced death and or abuse is a major health problem in America. And so some of those people, we know the names, countless victims like George Floyd, Philando Castile, Breonna Taylor, Dante Wright, just to name a few. And so we are concerned that there is accountability, and the badge is never a shield from accountability. We're asking that the officers that kill or brutalize people should be prosecuted and convicted. There are significant hurdles to prosecute officers and for unconstitutional acts. Current laws requires evidence that an officer intended to kill someone. The standard should call for prosecution when an officer is reckless and kills or brutalizes a person. Whether Derek Chauvin meant to kill George Floyd shouldn't be the standard in the courtroom. George Floyd is dead at the hands of officers sworn to serve the public and protect and serve. Those responsible must be held accountable to send a message that we as a society will not tolerate police recklessness. So that's just a little start of where we are on that issue. We here want to talk about that. We talked about some of these issues last year, and ironically, it is to the month that we had the last discussion with our law enforcement leaders in the community. So we're going to dive right into our discussion, and I will ask the first question. Is there a shift in policing due to all of the unnecessary shootings that we have seen lately? And more importantly, as you think of that, before you answer that question, would you give us your first reaction to when you heard the verdict against Officer Chauvin? And we'll start out with, I see the sheriff right in my eye first, so we'll start with you.
All right, President Bivens, thank you very much. Well, I was, disappointed as far as the fact that we had to go through this again. And I was happy that our justice system worked, and it appeared to work swiftly, and doesn't bring back a lost life. But I think this is a good step in the right direction. And so that was kind of my reaction to it. I got to be honest, I was also a little depressed that we've just been so divided lately, and I hope we turn a corner here and start working closely together, and hopefully these things stop happening, and we as a community come together and start making positive changes to where we need to be. As far as over this last year, whether I felt we've made some changes. I think we've had legislative changes that's come about at the state. But I've got to be honest, as you saw last year when we came up with the 10 things that couldn't wait, and that 99% of that here in San Joaquin County already doing, we had already implemented. So I've got to be honest with you, I'm new to this. I'm 2 years into it, 2.5 years now. But I'm very proud of Chief Jones and Tory Verber and all the other law enforcement executives here in San Joaquin County, that we were ahead of the curve on this. And I think you've seen lately that we walk the walk, and then when we're talking about it, and we've had people that we've had to fire, one that I've had to arrest and send to jail, and that's not a pleasurable thing for us, but I think it proves that we here in San Joaquin County stand up and say, when our officers do the right thing, we're going to admit that and stand behind them. But when we make mistakes, we're going to admit those also. So I'm very proud to be part of the law enforcement community here in San Joaquin County. It's still a difficult time, but I think we're making great strides, and I hope that we will be leaders for all of California to show how we interact and work with each other.
Okay, I'm going to move over to Pastor Trina. And you're engaged throughout the entire Central Valley, not just San Joaquin County.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, President Bivens. I was really leaned in and interested in hearing the responses from law enforcement side, because I believe the question you asked is, has there been reform? And I'd be interested in the response, not so much as far as any policy change. What at this point, how did I respond? At the time the verdict was read, I was actually on a commission call. I'm also a commissioner.
I tell you what we'll do. Since you opened up with what your hope and thought would be, why don't we do that, and then we'll come around the other way. So Chief Jones, would you respond to that? And what was your reflection as the verdict was passed?
Yeah, I'm going to give my first reflection when this tragic event happened. It sickened my stomach. It was a really blow to law enforcement. I feel like when the verdict came out, my opinion, my feeling, professionally and personally, was the justice system did what it was supposed to do. And so it was something that was necessary, but also, it's difficult for us in the law enforcement profession to see something like that happen. I would also say, so that was my personal and professional opinion from the verdict, right? Was the justice system prevailed, and he was held properly accountable. Here we've been seeing numerous shifts in policing, right? There is an evolution of policing that needs to continue to evolve. We get that. If we don't think that our profession needs to move forward in a progressive manner, then that's a problem, right? So I see that we're shifting in three key areas. One is in the metrics, right? What do we use to judge as success? Is it arrest rates? No. It's how are we building community trust, right? Those are the new metrics that we need to be utilizing in law enforcement. Relationships. It's not just community policing, but it's how do we tackle the very difficult topic of racial reconciliation, which we've been doing and we will continue to do. And then there's a third shift is in enforcement, the way we're enforcing the laws. Are we doing a blanket just zero tolerance enforcement in neighborhoods? No, we're being much more strategic. We're being data driven, and we're getting community input in how we do that. So really it's about moving forward, being innovative. And one thing we're doing in Stockton, which is pretty new to us, I have my police chief's community advisory board. That's one thing, but we now have the city manager's review board also that meets regularly to look at our data and to look at these key issues of use of force. So that's kind of some things we're doing to move forward, but also that's my reflection on the verdict.
Okay, and I will go to Tori if she's still on at the moment. She did tell me in advance that she had a funeral to attend and she would try to participate in the midst of it. As you see, she's in her car. So I appreciate you joining us today, Tori, and sorry about the funerals that you have to go to.
Thank you. And I'm not driving, I'm just sitting here. But I thank you, President Bivens. I appreciate that. So just kind of echoing the two gentlemen before me, what we did is really collected for the first time in our history all of our data. And we looked and acknowledged, if you look across the nation, most district attorney's office up until the last couple of years didn't even have data, nor did they release the data. And so that was, very troubling for us because you can't make the informed decisions that Chief Jones is talking about. And you can't also acknowledge and accept responsibility for past practices that were clearly, discriminatory. They had a terrible adverse impact on destroying families, financially, emotionally, and spiritually, and creating generational poverty, homelessness, and then generational incarceration. And we had to look at the role that we play here in making our decisions on who to charge, why do we charge, and for the reason that we are charging. So we've revamped our intake. All the crime reports that these gentlemen's offices generate come to me, or most of them do. And so when they come to me, we're looking at the totality of the circumstances and is there a better alternative? Is there a better resource to find? And I'm grateful this year, Chief Jones and I are partnering and we're in the preliminary stages and we're hoping to get a significant amount of community involvement. One of the areas where we see so much harm is family violence. If you look at the number of victims that we dealt with last year and assisted, it's in the tens of thousands of people. It stems from harm within the families because there has been a lot of untreated harm and a lot of untreated trauma that needs to be addressed. And so we're looking at better ways to provide those services to help people that are healing, because a lot of the situations that we're dealing with are crisis. So when you dial 911, all other systems have failed and you're in crisis and you need assistance with something or someone. And so how can we better prepare ahead of time so we have less people suffering harm and trauma, less people in crisis, more people able to understand the role of law enforcement and what they can and cannot do. And so we're looking at all of those mechanisms and driving our decision based upon that. So it's a very different time in law enforcement than probably I think all of us have done at least 30 years. It's a very different law enforcement than when we started 30 years ago with.
Okay, all right. Thank you much. We're gonna now go back to Trina.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for that shift. I appreciate hearing from the law enforcement because of course, any forward momentum is appreciated. but there has to also be a recognition and a realization that change in policy is not felt in community until it's actually seen in action. So it appearing on paper doesn't necessarily help for the community. So when the verdict was read, I started to say I'm also a commissioner for the state of California. So I was in a commission hearing as it was read, and my phone, smartwatch, everything just started ding, 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 ding. I couldn't get to it quick enough, of course. At break, when I was able to check, there was such a mix of emotions that came from people, everyone from sheer relief, people that were just holding their breath, hoping for the best, bracing for the worst, expecting more of the same. And right on the heels of a small sigh, like, okay, this was done, it was almost still now another bracing for what comes next, right? And we do know that there was more that came in that. And so there was a
Hold it 1 second. Someone has their mute off. Please mute your computer.
The mix of emotion came because it was, yes, the expectation is that that should have been the verdict. And that's not where we can necessarily celebrate. We see it as the bare minimum when when someone is murdered, they should be convicted, they should serve time, there are consequences. And just the very fact that we were celebrating that the law actually worked in this instance right away was sullied. It was like, why is that something outside of the norm? Why are we excited about that? Why do we have to rise for that to be, yes, the right thing finally happened? The right thing should always happen. And so we just had to kind of wade through the emotions, the up and down, the excited, I'm not excited, I'm still frustrated, I'm still angry that we're in this place. I do want to say for the local law enforcement that's on for San Joaquin County, Sheriff Withrow, for District Attorney Tori Berber Salazar, for Chief Jones, I am grateful for the things that you are doing in our area. I'm working in the 5 counties in the San Joaquin Central Valley. I have the best. I've had meetings with each of you. My folk at Faith in the Valley have had substantial meetings with you. And in that, this is the best relationship in the Central Valley. So we are blessed in that we are working with you, not perfect systems, not perfect policies, not everything working in the manner in the way that it should, but you are still leading the charge in the Central Valley, which is, again, we're at that same crossroads. Good news, and how sad is that we know the struggles that we have, and you represent the best of what we've seen in the Central Valley so far. So what I want to say to that, there was one other piece that I think we're living in this moment, and then I'll kind of step back for the next question. Sheriff Withrow, that's only been in a couple of years, that certainly has brought forward some positive steps for us. You in your statement said we've been divided lately, and that's probably the only thing that I just a saying, just a matter of speech. But it kind of struck when it was said, because it's like this, it's nothing lately about it. The systems have always, and then Tori kind of gave nod at it, talking about the history, has always been severe and brutal and broken. It's just been more hidden, and it's coming more to light. And said one more thing, it's coming more to light now, which then it makes people think, well, we're making progress, we should be glad, but people are dealing in weariness, because it's not just a lately divided, it's not just happening now, it's happened for so many years. People they're tired. Tired, and each time you think, how tired can tired be? Well, I'm a little bit more tired today than I was yesterday, because it's gone on for so long. So as new policies come, the expectation of patience as they take their time, I think we're almost running out of time. We're looking at some things that's going on now in our community that says it feels like we're moving forward, so there should be patience, but we are living at the tail end of years of broken systems, so that patience isn't rising, and it's not in alignment with what we might think it should be. And so to the degree that we can put policies in place and then ensure that they are embraced, because in addition to Chauvin, there were a whole host of folk that sat around with that being an accepted practice and allowed it to happen, which is where more of the grief comes from.
Thank you very much, Trina. Now I'm going to move over to Adante. Please unmute yourself and you have the floor to respond to what your initial reaction was. And I'm really curious about that as a civil rights lawyer that's been on the battlefield for so long and in so many issues.
Thank you. Yeah, when I saw the verdict, I should say, leading up to it being announced, there was this high level of anxiety and anticipation because we've watched this movie before, and unfortunately the previous movies and almost all of the versions of the movie ends in a very bad conclusion, which was justice not being served. And so I think the collective feeling in the community was, is this the same old story that we've seen before? Fortunately, in this particular case, it wasn't, and justice was served. So there was a sense of relief, if you will, and almost a sense of gratitude, which, as I reflected on it later in the day, as I talked about it to others and who were commenting on it, it struck me. I said, why am I feeling grateful when justice has been served and it's been denied for so long? But that's the point, because it's been denied so long. When you're hungry, somebody gives you a cracker, it looks like steak, right? So if you've been parched and you're really thirsty, somebody gives you a drop of water, it's like putting your mouth under a water faucet or something. And so, but that's the status of the community. And so, there was a collective sigh. Everyone was very, happy to see justice served. And justice served meant that police officers were going to be held accountable to the same extent that the average ordinary citizen is. And the prosecution, frankly, in that case was vigorous. And having been a part and helped or partnered with or other district attorneys when they've also tried to prosecute officers or sat with the grieving families as they watched a criminal process take place, that was a model of a criminal prosecution of an officer. And I'll just say that from the lawyer's perspective, from my legal perspective, the thing that's something to understand, and why I think they were successful in the prosecution, is because the fellow officers, from the ones that were there on the street who watched and allowed it to happen, all the way up the chain of command, to supervising officer, to the trainers, up to the chief, stood on the right side of justice. And many times the community is left feeling that the higher ranking officers, the rank and file officers, all rally around the misconduct to protect the badge or to protect a particular officer. And so the institution of policing is put above the ideals of justice. And in this criminal prosecution, I think it was hard for any juror to turn their head when you actually have a trainer saying, this is the way it's supposed to be done, or this is not the way I was trained. And so, moving forward in terms of reform, I would just say that, my experience with the Central Valley is, look, it's like anywhere else. There's going to be issues. There's going to be times where, like any other profession, people do not behave according to the way that they're expected to do or conduct their jobs. And when they do, they have to be, it has to be addressed. And so in the relative sense, given that I do talk to the community all around Northern California, the Central Valley, I don't get the most amount of calls from people looking for help, but I do get them. And so I would just say that as we continue to move forward and progressing in terms of bringing policing in line with the 21st century, we just have to be mindful of the past history that we're dealing with. I think the district attorney said the trauma within the communities and within the families, and how that comes from a lot of different broken systems. And at the same time, understanding on the other end of that spectrum, we have to weed out the problem officers with like early warning systems. We have to understand that those officers who are using force at a disproportionate rate than their other fellow officers need to be brought in, examined, retrained. And from a district attorney perspective, when we see cases being brought to the district attorney's office for 148, resisting arrest, contempt of cop, things like that, when there aren't any underlying crimes, then we can't continue to endorse the bad behavior by then forcing a person into the criminal justice system to defend themselves in a case like that. I'm not saying that every case winds up being a bogus case, but what I am saying is that that starts the process of the trauma that we're talking about, which then digs us into a deeper hole. So all of these different things are interconnected. And I think when you talk about police reform, you're also talking about how to balance that with community need on a principle of equality, but also moving forward and understanding what our particular roles are in the system.
Thank you, Dante. Now we'll call in Bishop Troy Dockery.
Thank you, President Bivens, and to all of our staff and those that are watching. Going back to your question, President Bivens, you asked how did I feel, or what, to that degree. I'm gonna be honest, I was nervous. I was extremely nervous for the outcome. And I agree with Dante Porter because we've seen this before. We've been down this road before, and it was a small victory. It was a small victory that lasted for a moment because I knew, just based on history, that we more than likely would be down this road again. And one of the reasons why I think we've got the victory in this particular situation was because of video, because someone had their phone out and it was almost clear cut what had taken place. But there are so many other cases that are still pending that we've seen in the past that have not been given the same attention, that didn't have any video to it. And we still have hurting families. But I'm gonna be honest, man, I was extremely nervous. I had a lot of anxiety, didn't know what the outcome was going to be. I thought it would have been clear cut because of what we saw, what America saw, what the world saw. And we did get that. But it lasted for a moment because I just knew that more than likely we'd be down this road again and we might not get the same outcome. But as far as the policing, as far as policies and procedures, I think one of the things that we need to look at moving forward is that as policies and procedures are being developed, I'm asking if the community can somewhat be involved in that policing new structure. A lot of times policies are being done, but it really doesn't have the community in mind. I think if the community has a part in what could be done, some of the intercessions that can be made, some of the other outcomes, I think we'll have a better policing structure. One thing we don't have a lot of is that community police interaction. Right now, the community, and primarily the African-American and Brown communities, are afraid. We want the police to be around, but we're almost scared to call them because of an outcome. Even just driving down the street, and you get pulled over for whatever, broken light or whatever. We are afraid to stop because that can turn into something else. But I think moving forward, and I enjoyed hearing the comments from Sheriff Withrow and the comments from Attorney Torrey and Chief Jones about the new policing policies coming forward. But I'm asking if the community can help be a part of that restructuring. I think that would be such a major move in our city and in our county. So thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Dockery. I also want to acknowledge the fact that we have some guest branches online with us today. We have San Bernardino branch on board with us, which is my hometown. And we also have the Tri-Valley branch, which is just right up the road here in Contra Costa County, online with us. So the information in this process is also hopefully will help throughout the state of California, not just in San Joaquin County. Again, I think all of us had hope and anticipation during the trial, and with the the actual verdict that was let down. And as you all said, and most of the people that I've talked to, everybody had an instant of joy, an instant of being able to let their breath out and breathe. So we could all say for a second, I can breathe, even though George Floyd was not able to. So with that in mind, as we move down the road, there are a couple of questions that I saw pop up in the chat. So at this point, I'm going to ask Najee to read a couple of the questions out of the chat, and you all can respond to them as you feel free, or that way I won't have to call on you. So Najee, would you pull out a couple of questions?
Sure. Yes. Thank you, President Bivens. The first question I'd like to maybe see if we can follow up on is there's the public deserves to know if officers are corrupt, dangerous, and or abusive. And will the police or the public or the police commission or the public have availability of this information in the future?
I'll go ahead and take that one.
Okay.
To begin with. So I'll put it this way, that the Peace Officer Bill of Rights does limit what we're able to give publicly, right? And that's California legislative action. But when we, whether it be myself or Sheriff Withrow or the Tracy Police Chief, whomever, when we terminate an employee, which has happened recently, that is disclosed to the public. But often the internal discipline that might not lead up to an actual termination, we're actually not just limited, we're prohibited by disclosing certain things, meaning we actually will be legally held accountable if we disclose some things outside of Peace Officer Bill of Rights. But I guess my point is, do I fire police officers? Yes. Have I fired numerous over my tenure as police chief? Yes, and I'm not proud of it, but it has to be done. But it's about holding our officers accountable because of public trust, because you all should have some feeling of legitimacy in your police department. I'll turn it over to anyone else who wants to jump on that one.
Well, I'll just chime in a little bit from a community perspective, or as an attorney who's oftentimes trying to lead people through the process to find out what happened with the officer or what the outcome was of their complaint. And I would say that you're right in the sense that the legislature does limit, the law limits what information can be provided to the public. I think one way of trying to address the public's concern around what is taking place is, even if there was a summary, since an annual, if you will, report of some sort, where people would understand how many complaints were filed, how many were sustained, what type of complaints were filed, and the timeline, if you will, the average timeline for resolving a complaint. I'll just speak on, for example, police shooting cases, which we all are aware of. If we're not, I'll let you know now, the law recently changed, which is forcing police departments to disclose and produce the video cams if someone was shot and killed. And so that's been a very big sea change, which is also contributing to why we see more of these shootings and videos, whether it's in our social media or on the news at night, which then has allowed this issue to come from the dark, where it has been in the communities where it's happening, to now in the general public's view. And I liken that to the civil rights movements in the 60s and 70s, or maybe I should say the 50s and 60s, in the sense that when people saw dogs and water cannons and people being beat for marching on a bridge, we as a country together could not deny that this was happening. Whereas before it reached the television screen and in people's homes, where we all had to address it as a nation together, it was happening over there. It's not happening to us. We could debate the facts about what took place. And so bringing that back to what we see in terms of internal affairs investigations, shooting cases, police officers being disciplined, if the idea is for the community to gain trust in terms of knowing that police are being held accountable when they do violate their principles or when they do violate the law, or better yet, just if I have a concern, it's being thoroughly investigated regardless of the outcome, then that will add to the community feeling a sense of trust and legitimacy in law enforcement. And so I know there's only so much each police department could do given the law. Fortunately, we're seeing the law change and evolve and progress, but I think there's also other things that can be done to help the community gain that trust. But it is good to hear and to see those members of law enforcement that are here on this panel. And obviously, you know, the fact that you're here means something. We need everyone else to join at the table too.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'd like to add in, again, from the NAACP family, the San Gabriel branch is involved as well, which is in LA County. So, and that's a great thing. And I see we have our former sheriff is online as well. So welcome to all of you. As we go down this road, Naji, you had another question that for the chat.
Sure. Yes. Yes. The next one is countless victims like George Floyd, Philando Castile, Breonna Taylor, and now Daunte Wright have had their obituaries reopened, edited, rewritten day after day. Why isn't the verdict sending a message for a shift in policing? And the comment is that this is not just a training issue. Anyone wants to?
You want me to take that one,
If anyone,
President Bivens?
Go ahead.
All right. It's not a training issue. We need reform. We need to move our policing profession forward. And so example is I have a police policy group that's members of the public who actually has input in not just talk, but actual input in policy, of which we've been changing. So I guess my response to that would be agree. We need to get more of the public's comments, not just as comments, but voice in the way they want to be policed and voice in actually policy change. So I would agree with that. And we're moving forward in that way, which is not traditional. That's not traditional policing.
Sheriff Withrow, what's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I agree with Chief Jones. Obviously, I think that what happened in the Floyd case and some of the others were not just training issues. You know, these are moral and ethical issues. I think it was Mr. Pointer who talked about how good it was to see the chief of police and other officers testifying. But I think an important point there was that officer was allowed to be in that position on another man's neck for 9 minutes. And what we are, I know Chief Jones and all the other chiefs in the area are talking about is making sure that all the other officers around at these times are taking action. And that's not necessarily a training issue on how you use use of force or something like that. That's a moral and an ethical issue. We want men and women who work for our departments to recognize when something's wrong, to recognize when an officer has lost his temper or is acting out of policy, and to intercede, to step in. And I hope Chief Jones doesn't mind, but I want to use an example I used just the other day. And we had an incident where my internal affairs was contacted by Chief Jones' internal affairs. As you know, we often work closely together on the street. My officers were helping filling on a case, and we were taking a subject into custody. And from one of Chief Jones' officers' view on the street, it looked like my officer took a handcuffed man and threw him into a car and bounced him back onto the street. That's the view he saw. He immediately took action and reported it to his supervisors, who then contacted our department, and we immediately took action to pull all those body camera footage and to look at that incident. Now, I don't know if other police agencies can brag about one officer complaining about another officer, but we here in San Joaquin County are proud of that. I was fortunate. It turned out that the body camera showed that the officer did not even have his hands on the suspect, his body camera and another body camera, when the parolee, as walking towards the car, threw himself into the car. Oh, geez, made a big show of it, dropped onto the ground as my officer tried to catch him as he dropped onto the ground. And we were blessed to have that body camera footage, because had we not, our officers probably would have been off duty right now under investigation. So I'm very proud and thankful that Chief Jones' officers acted in that way and did what they thought was right. And I'm glad that our officers had done the right thing also. And I was blessed that we had the body camera footage. So, I guess to wrap it up, to bring it back around, I think the big part of this here is that we want men and women in our departments to have the character and the honor to treat all human beings properly and to follow our policies and our laws. And so I think that's really what we're striving for.
Let's take one more Nadia out of the chat. And
Right,
then
right before we go there, may I just comment real quick? On that particular one, I'm really grateful for the responses. Is it a training issue? No, it's already been said, definitely not a training issue. But Chief Jones, a bit back too, also talked about race, because it's not a training issue, it's a race issue. And I want to say that even beyond moral, because we do see examples of situations that's handled differently depending on who's involved. That's important as it even comes to the community policing. So, through our organization, Faith in the Valley, we bring people from the community. We try and facilitate those spaces and make sure that we have conversation and we participate in the community policing and all of those. And those things, when the race issues aren't dealt with and when they blow up, and yes, Sheriff Withrow, thank God for the body cams, because it shows when things are being done right as well. But when those blow up, it makes then the community steps back and begin to wonder, should I be partnering with the police departments? Should I be partnering with law enforcement for all of what we're attempting to do? So all of the good then gets trampled on, which is why we do have to look at issues and call every one of them into question. And it makes it hard, particularly even when we talked about POBAR, the Police Officers Bill of Rights, like that just is the final law and cannot be changed. We have to go after that. We have to look at that, because that does tie the hands of those that the officials, the chiefs, et cetera, and they're unable to do certain things. And that is hard to get at, because you are looking at kind of a tale of two cities. So for most people, that seems like reasonable things that should protect people doing a good job. And in most parts of our communities, the officers are doing a good job. They don't get to see that other side. And so when it's time to speak out against it, or about police misconduct or brutality, or how they address the public or disrespect the public, the truth that a whole lot of our communities can tell is that that doesn't happen. That seems odd or strange that the police officers would do that. I've never seen that. And they are not lying. They have not ever seen it, because it is not a training issue. They know how to appear with certain people in certain areas. But in different areas, the truth of the matter is that there is a different side of some, not all officers and deputies that come out. And then that's the piece that makes it hard in our communities of color, and which makes it not a training issue, but a race issue that we still have to get underneath, even policy, because even we have some policy on the books now that aren't necessarily adhered to in certain parts of our community. So we have a tough job. I'm glad we're at the table. I'm glad we're on the same side of wanting things to improve and progress and put more policy and bring more community to the table. But until we find a way to truly root out and deal with that race issue that causes scenarios to shift based on who's involved, we still will be just kind of a mocking time, right? We won't see the forward movement we desire. We've got to get at that as well. Not a training issue, right? But it is indeed a race issue.
Dante, could you speak to that as well?
About it not being a training issue, yeah, sure. I mean, if we're honest and have a very frank conversation, race has been intertwined in the experience of everyone in this country from the beginning, and policing no different. We understand policing comes from a root of slave catching. We also understand that people bring their biases to work with them every day, be it an attorney, a teacher, a professor, a police officer, a district attorney, whatever your position is, you bring biases and prejudices to work, and they manifest themselves in different ways. When you have a badge and a gun, it can manifest itself in a way as where you're abusive towards people or discriminatory in the way in which you police. And so we see that play out on our streets. We see it play out in the way of the incarceration rate. And we see it play out in the destruction of families and whole communities. The fact now that we are trying to address this together in a more transparent way gives me hope. But as we understand too, and I think it's already been said, we can't rely upon a piece of paper to solve this puzzle or this problem, because we can have policies, but then are they enforced? We can have training, but then when the officer's out on the street and they're dealing with their field training officer, is the field training officer then telling them, hey, in this community, this is the way we have to police. You have to be this way in order to gain respect or to enforce whatever the type of code, if you will, or the way in which we're going to interact with these different communities. And so that's oftentimes where we see, at least it's been my experience, where we need the intervention. It's the training academy certainly is a big part of it. What videos officers are shown before they go out into the streets. If you're watching and kind of ingrained in your mind about if you're a little soft with somebody, and soft is a word that shouldn't even be used. If you're patient with somebody, or if you don't set the tone of authoritative, as soon as you deal with this person, you could be like this person in this video that's being shot down on the side of the road. Well, that adds to a person feeling on edge and anxiety. And then when they are in a car stop, you see what could happen. So, it is a training issue in some ways, but I think the sheriff or the chief said it, it's a moral issue, it's ethics, but it's also dealing with the implicit bias that people bring to work, and just being transparent in that. And when we see the flashpoints, when we see the flashpoints in an officer who is overly aggressive, who is, appears to be targeting particular communities, or has a bunch of resisting arrest charges all the time without other underlying charges. We see an officer who's using more force than other people on the force, or using their gun, because I think everyone here from law enforcement will say the average police officer is never going to fire their gun in the course of their career. So when you see an officer that is quick to pull out their gun and is also using it, that warrants attention. It doesn't mean that every time they pulled their gun or every time they fired their gun, they were wrong. It just means that we should be concerned as a community. And if you're a supervising officer, you should be concerned that we need to look at this, to address it, to find out, is there a problem, and nip it in the bud before it plays out in a fatal way on our city streets. So, I think the approach is correct. And once again, I didn't know what to expect coming into the panel. I'm happy to hear what I'm hearing from law enforcement. I just know that getting the change is going to take each individual officer on the street. And it's not just the chief or the sheriff, although the tone starts at the top and then it has to work its way down. And we also understand many police officers are 20, 30 years into their career, right? And they're the ones who are investigating the incidents, training other officers. So the mentality, not only at the top, but also in the middle, has to flow down to those that are on the street in order to see the change.
And if I could just jump in on that as well, because our new policy here in the district attorney's office, and it was created in partnership with the community, is we won't be charging. A lot of people might not know what a 148 is, but it's a big part of our day is resisting arrest. And if you've ever been arrested, you're probably going to resist, because they're going to push your arms behind your back and put handcuffs on. And that's not something people are used to doing. And so we looked at that, and it was an overcharged case by and large. We were overcharging that. And so we've gone back, looked at all of our 148s, and in partnership with the chief of police at Stockton, and looked at those cases. And now we're not issuing any body worn camera. I mean, and when any 148s are resisting arrest without body worn camera to corroborate that statement. And then we're also reporting back any patterns of behavior that we think are showing signs where the 148 is being overused, oversought, or patterns of behavior that are more aggressive than are necessary for the rise. There is a reasonableness to every response. And if it's an unreasonable response, then we're looking at that and we're sending it back. We're also working on legislation. Obviously, we've been the big partner on SB 299 to get resources to people, but we've also been lobbying this year to get better accountability for officers who fail to intervene or fail to report when they see excessive force. And it's critical because without a body worn camera, and even with a body worn camera, depending on the circumstances, it doesn't always tell the story either. And it's also very difficult to dissect sometimes because if you're struggling in close proximity, the body worn camera is at the chest level. And so those are difficult statements. You know, the body worn camera, if you look at Mr. Floyd and, you know, God bless him and the jury for the courage of doing what they did and following justice. But if you didn't have that video and you look at that crime report, they're two different stories. And if you didn't have the video from the third party, you had a much different crime report and probably a much different journey. And if he had had a body worn camera, it wouldn't have been focused on Mr. Floyd. It would have been looking in another direction. So they're not always the whole story. A lot of people want to believe that the body worn camera tells the whole story, but it really doesn't. There's a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different views from that all have to be taken into consideration and make a determination as to what charges, if any, should proceed and can you prove them beyond a reasonable doubt. But with that tool that we have and with technology we have now, it's imperative that we use it to drive better solutions. And I think these policies now where we won't be charging any case without. So we park every 148, and then we're starting to do data research and looking at patterns. And in the past, we had a number of, and I appreciate the chief and the sheriff coming to me on this one. There was a lot of old bench warrants for cases for, you know, possession of a pipe in 1997, you know, or, you know, possession of a narcotic now that is completely legal. But the bench warrant, because you didn't come to court, means that there's actually a court order for your arrest. And I can't stop that. The chief and the sheriff can't stop that. That is a court order. And so what we did is we formed a partnership along with Californians for Safety and Justice, and we recalled so far, I think we're at 10,000 of those bench warrants from cases that are decades old, that are no longer would be held as criminal behavior, nor would they be fair or just to bring in, because you would have to stay for probably 48 hours before you could be released by the court, because only the court can overrule that order. And so we recalled all of those, and that's helped out a lot with a lot of people that were getting arrested going, I don't even remember what I was doing in 2006, you know, and why am I getting arrested? And I shouldn't be arrested. I haven't done anything wrong. And so those are just some policies, because I know we talk global that we need to do better, but I can tell you, working with the sheriff and the chief and the other chiefs as well, we are doing better. We're implementing critical, very data-driven, very research-driven, and using best evidence practices to determine what is best while engaging with our community. Have we always done the best? No. Can we do better? Absolutely. But every day we do try to do that, and we're working on it. So, and last thing, you did mention body worn cameras. Sometimes people don't realize that during that first 12 to 24 hours, we have to interview every recipient witness that's on a critical incident. And if they see the video before, the first thing, and you know, Dante, you're a great attorney, you're going to ask, did that video influence you? So that's part of the reason why there's a little bit of a delay time, is you need to give law enforcement an opportunity to interview every witness free of anything, because you might have a moment of victory by getting the tape out, but if you lose the trial, you know, it hurts, and it doesn't win the, you know, doesn't win the war. You might get the battle, but you're not going to win the war. We got to win the war here. So that's, you know, sometimes I know law enforcement gets a bad rap for not releasing it, but actually it's a very important investigative tool. And we try to get it out as fast as we can, but we need to be able to interview recipient witnesses to any major incident free of any taint, because otherwise when they testify, the defense is going to just go at them that you didn't see that, you saw it on the video, your recollection isn't right. And it does affect a case. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because I know a lot of times they take a lot of heat for not releasing it. It does need to come out. And both the sheriffs and the chiefs have great policies on to release it. but they have to balance the importance of doing what's right in that investigation as well.
All right, thank you. So there's a number of questions in the chat regarding bias, whether implicit or explicit. So I'm going to try and see if we can bring these all together into a single question, and I hope that I do the requesters justice. So with respect to implicit or explicit bias, I think the general question is, what are the different law enforcement agencies doing in that regard, whether that's in the recruitment process or after someone's been hired, and trying to understand how we correct behavior and how it affects the communities.
Thank you. I'll start off with that because I have to leave soon for another appointment. But great question. We do implicit bias training annually with all of our personnel because we feel it's a perishable skill. What I mean by that is we all have biases, everybody here today, right? And it's shaped from our upbringing, from what we watch in media, whatever it is. And so we do very specific under the umbrella. And I'm going to give multiple shout outs to Adante Pointer. He brought up principles multiple times, and I agree with him. It's about the principles of policing, and we actually call it principled policing. And part of that is police legitimacy. Is the police department viewed as a legitimate, right, government agency? And part of principled policing is talking with community, and part of the training is this very difficult conversation about race and policing. I mean, is it difficult? Does it need to be courageous? Yes. And part of that is, it is in fact the implicit bias training. So we talk about, for example, we all have stereotypes. We make stereotypes. We've all done it from, youth through adulthood, but then that turns into, are your stereotypes actually turning into, are you manifesting those into the way you actually act upon individuals within our community? And that's what our, we have three sets of implicit bias training where we strip that apart. We dive deep into it. We talk about the fact that, look, here's a fact. Are there racial disparities in the criminal justice system? Yes. Are there racial disparities in policing? Yes. Let's peel that apart. Let's start to pull that apart and examine why. So I just want to let you know that is a key area that we are examining and we are training on a regular basis.
Sheriff Withrow, is there
Yeah, I just, I'll piggyback off of what Chief Jones said. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, it's Chief Jones and his department that led the way on this in our community. And it is a major part of the training and background investigations and everything that's involved in getting an officer out on the street. And it's an ongoing training that goes on, every year or two. That is, it's addressed by our office, and it's updated each time. So we are well aware of it, and I think we are being very proactive on this. But we've got humans involved in this, and anytime we have humans involved, we're not perfect, and we're prone to make mistakes, and who knows what certain keys will be on somebody. But when we fight and we have a problem, we address it, and our goal obviously is to not have it raise its ugly head in our department. I wish we could be perfect, and we will continue to strive to be so. But we are fortunate that we're being very aggressive towards the training and the imparting the knowledge upon all of our employees, not just the officers on the street, but my officers in the jail and our civilian staff who are interacting with our public also. So I think it's something that we're very aware of and working very hard at, and will continue to do so and to grow along those things as better training techniques come in.
if both of you, oh, go ahead, President. Bivens.
You go ahead, Najee.
Oh, I was just gonna say if both could also speak to maybe during the recruitment process, how you try to identify whether it's implicit or explicit bias in terms of the recruits.
Yeah, thanks. That's actually part of the background process, right? And do some folks slip through that shouldn't be cops? I mean, let's all be honest with each other. Yes, it happens, but it's rare. Absolutely part of the background process is to vet out any racism, any hate, any bias that will affect their job employment. You know, absolutely. And we follow the same kind of state guidelines that I know the Sheriff Withrow does as well. But if they do slip through the cracks of the hiring process, then it's our job, sheriff and myself, to weed out folks that we do find out are potentially biased or racist. And so that's part of, you know, heavy as the crown, right? When you leave the department, you are responsible for every single police officer, every single deputy within your agency. And so we do weed them out. We do fire folks that need to be fired. But you know, the hiring process, now I want to switch over to diversity, how we're all trying to include more diversity recruitment within our law enforcement agencies. We want to better reflect, and the sheriff and I have talked about this many times, we want to better reflect the communities of which we serve. But the sort of elephant in the room also is that it's very difficult to get anyone interested in being a police officer right now. So I'm seeing my recruitment numbers, my applicant numbers really fall. So I think we need to encourage all of us. We need to encourage those that want to make change, those who want to be a positive influence in the law enforcement community, to apply and be part of their local police department or sheriff's agency.
And I'd like to just jump in on that too, also, if I could. The Chief is absolutely right. As many of you know, we've partnered with Chief Berries over at SUSD, and we formed a new program, the Law Enforcement Application Development Program, where we're trying to start when our kids are very young and try and encourage them to become part of our departments or in law enforcement at any level, whether it's the DA's office or law enforcement on the street, or I've even dropped the age to age 18 where you can become a correctional officer. And the background process is extremely rigorous, and they go very deep and into interviewing your neighbors where you and just trying to find out if there are any potential problems. But as Chief Jones said, we have, I'm sure both have said, how in God's name did this person become an officer? You know, how did we miss this? How do we miss this in a psychological or in a background? And again, it's humans being involved. But I'm hoping that, you know, it's very difficult to, once you get to know somebody, to hate on them. And so I'm hoping the more that our departments become ingrained with our community and we get to know our community better, and the more we have from our community joining us and our department reflecting what our community looks like, then this will slowly go away. But there is no, one test that we can do that's going to show this, that we can stop somebody who has some bias in their heart. We're doing the best we can on it.
Well, now on that note, both Sheriff and Chief Jones, are any of the psychological evaluators African Americans? Because certainly not only from the training perspective, but from our historical living within a greater society, we have a better sense of whether a person is racist or demonstrating racial perspectives, and even some tests that will pull out or show that their subtle racism is there and can pop out, that you all don't have the capability necessarily of seeing as non-Black people, or non-Latinx people? And additionally, would you be open to having individuals from the community serve on the interview panel with you, which will also add to that perspective in terms of, one, helping people to feel like they're going to get a fair process in the middle, and secondly, that there is a non-biased, if I can say that, or less biased view of the individuals, and then particularly as it relates to bringing in people of color, because part of our frustration is that for all these years and all of the activity, to not be able to bring on new Black officers in either entity, and that too could go, I can't say that about Tori because she got a large number of folk and some of them up in the administration. In where we are within those your two entities, it'll be a long time before a Black person is ever in a position to be a supervisor or a manager, short of going outside and bringing people in. So would you be open to adding to your interview panels African-American persons? That certainly people that have an understanding and those type of things. I'm not talking about just anyone, but would you be open to that?
Well, I'll jump on. I mean, I'm sure we'd be open to that. Of course, we have the psychological is done by a medical professional away from our department, and it's a test that's a standard that's set by our state that they go through. And so I don't know if there's people of colors that work in those doctors' offices or not. That's something I can certainly check on. And as far as the panel, I would be open to that. I've got to be honest with you. I'll have to check with our captain down in our professional standards division as far as making sure that there aren't legal issues as far as private information and all those type of things that we draw from to do a background on candidates. But we welcome anything that we can do to try and make sure that we are getting the best candidates possible that do not have any type of implicit bias or I don't think any of us can say that we don't have any implicit bias, but we want to make sure we get the best people out there that are treating our citizens right. Nobody wants anyone mistreating any of our citizens out there. So it is certainly something that we can look into, on my side at least.
And we do understand confidentiality and even the notion of signing confidentiality statements. We had to sign one to be on the city manager's police oversight committee. So, you know, we have a lot of professional people within the Black community, and certainly we understand that if you're sitting in that type of environment, there are expectations and requirements that you have on you if you even opt to do so. So that shouldn't be an issue. And I look at it as you're the chief and the captain reports to you, not you reporting to the captain. Chief Jones?
I think he had to drop off, President.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I want to support what you just said really quickly, for the same reason that a lot of our community does not see some of the certain actions of law enforcement. It would be so amazing in whatever frame that you could pull from the wisdom of community, because sometimes microaggressions will only come out against someone unlike yourself. So if you have people of, people that are white that's doing the panel interviews or doing the psych evals, all of those different parts. I've served on the Civil Service Commission before, so I've had an opportunity to have just a little bit of glimpse into that. I promise, just a community body that would have conversation. It can be set questions, however you'd want to have it set up. You would absolutely be able to pick up things that you would never get, even through a psych evaluation when it's coming from someone that looks like me, like the same person. You're going to need that cross to be able to get early indicators of some things.
Bishop,
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that input. I think it's a great suggestion.
You know, I was going to say, and thank you, President Bivens. So much is being said, and I got so many thoughts going through my mind. We talked about training, we talked about policy and procedures, We talked about racial biases and things of that nature. And I think all of that is pertinent from the community. But there's one word that's been thrown out a few times. That's the word policing. And I'm gonna be honest, when I hear the word policing, though I know how it's being used, I know what it means. But when you hear the word policing or being policed from the African-American perspective, it sounds like I'm being watched. Sounds like almost from the standpoint of being looked at or waiting for something negative to happen so I can be policed. I come from a correctional background, so I understand that there's a difference between being policed and then having a positive police interaction. And if the community does not have a positive police interaction, it's going to be very difficult for the police to police. And right now, there's a negative stigma in the community with the police department from being policed and having a lack of positive police interaction. What I mean by that is, I think Chief Jones and Sheriff Whitlow talked about some of the training that's being done with police officers and how to operate within the community. But from the church world, we'll say it like this: faith without works is dead. You can have policies, you can have procedures, you can have training, you can have your annual training, but if that training is not being implemented in the community, then all you had was training. So there has to be some type of way that the training that's being trained can be somehow implemented in the community by way of not just driving down the streets and looking to see what's going on, but drive down the street, roll down the windows and speak, wave, introduce yourself. I think a lot of that is not being done in the community. We see police officers drive down the street in various neighborhoods, but very seldom do we have that positive police interaction. Most of the interaction that we have, especially in certain communities, is from a negative perspective. And I think if we create that positive interaction, we might have more people of color, blacks and browns, that would want to participate in being a police officer. I think there's a generation that's probably 45 and up. I'm 51, 51, 50, somewhere around there. I'm over 50. But when I was a kid, being a police officer was one of the top 3 employments that you want to have: a police officer, a fireman, and maybe a doctor. But this generation does not look at the police department or the having the job of a police in the same light that I did when I was younger. It's more of a negative light. But I think a lot of it is because there is a very small percentage of positive police interaction. And I think if we can begin to shift that culture, I think that we'll see a lot more community change, as well as less police brutality in our communities. I think that would change. And I think Pastor Trina made mention something to, I'll make a point that we have a lot of good people that have wonderful intentions that get through the process, but then they might turn bad because of the culture that they might work in. At the Stockton PD, county sheriffs, there has to be a changing of the culture in order to see more positive interaction. Because when you have good people come in, they want to serve the community, they want to be this wonderful officer, but then they come in as a rookie and then they begin to embrace the set culture of the department. And if the culture of the department is more biased or has a negative interaction, then those new officers coming in, they're going to embrace the culture because they're trying to get in, they're trying to fit in, they're trying to be a part of that department. So, but positive police interaction, I think, is going to be a major key in our cultural shift. Thank you, President Bivens.
I messed around and threw myself out for a second, but you're welcome, Bishop. Nothing wrong with the fact that we make mistakes in this electronic world. I also want to acknowledge the fact that we have representatives from the Modesto branch and also from the San Fernando Valley branch on here. And if I said it wrong, I'm sure Ms. Landry will send me a text correcting me. So anyway, moving right along. Did we lose Dante? We may have, hope not. Oh, there you are.
No, I'm still here.
On the issue of the years in the training of police, what's your perspective? Because in some countries, you have to go to school, go be in training for 2 years before you can be a police officer. In some places, 3 years, as I think was the highest number. But yet our officers go through training for pretty much 6 months or so, 600 hours. But yet to be a hairstylist or cosmetologist, you got to go for 1,600 hours. And a cosmetologist may burn your scalp or cut your hair too short. But if a police officer makes an error, you may never breathe again. Your family may grieve forever. What's your thought on that as a civil rights attorney and some of the issues that you've addressed? And I do know that the Post Academy upgrades, and right now they just went through a new training and looking at some different things to train officers on. But what's your thought related to the timeframes and the knowledge that folks gain before becoming an officer?
Well, I think you summed it up pretty well when you said that, to become a beautician, you're going to spend 1,600 hours, essentially a year and a half or more before you're entrusted to do people's hair. Whereas we as a society are prepared to give people badges and guns to make this life and death decisions and or incarceration decisions, or investigate crimes or solve problems or, deal with physical confrontations or potential violent confrontations with a lot less training. Given Post has, as refresher courses. So in order to make sure, perishable skills are addressed and refined and further developed, and that's important. But in my opinion, seeing this, and having, once again, investigated and represented, far too many families who have lost someone or been harmed, I believe that there is a level of competency that a person is going to get when they come out of the Post Academy. No question, no doubt. Okay. But just as with me, okay, I came out of law school, I had to take a test. And after I took the test, while I had the powers of an attorney, I went and sought training, which is like going to your field training officer and learning the ropes, right? And then I have my continual refresher courses and so on and so forth. It took me 3 years of law school to be able to even take the test to become an attorney. And so perhaps and I just throw this out of here as a thought, perhaps is after you come out of police academy, you're not given a gun to patrol the streets. Maybe you come out of the police academy and instead of automatically being granted that awesome privilege of making life and death decisions in that way, you should have some time where you actually are forced to rely and develop your other skills so that you don't rely upon the gun as your first basis of how to solve a problem or an issue, or yet give you more confidence, tombstone courage by way of having the gun, putting yourself in dangerous situations and sacrificing officer safety. I mean, these things to me seem pretty common sense, and this is what we need to do in terms of modernizing policing. But you have to have a pipeline of people coming in, and given the spotlight and the way in which policing is right now in our country, I understand why there's a lot less interest in becoming an officer. I also know too, at the very same time, unemployment rates in certain communities are very high. And so, maybe that's marrying the two together, is that if communities that traditionally went into policing are no longer as interested in becoming police, then perhaps those communities who have not been embraced and don't have that pipeline established are an opportunity that should be taken advantage of. And given what I'm hearing, it sounds like there are efforts being made. I certainly think starting up the pipeline earlier than waiting till finding to try to recruit people when they're an adult or in their 20s is not the best thing, especially in our community where we already know the likelihood of a person having a criminal record is a lot higher than it is in the white community, given the over policing, given the communities in which people are growing up in. And so, starting off early with trying to dismantle the idea of police being bad or a career or profession that is not something that an African-American or a Latinx person wants to go into, starting that early with recruiting by showing them, hey, through the PAL programs and through other programs in the school and extracurricular, and also providing some sort of financial support is critical. It's the same thing that happened with colleges, right? In order to increase minority recruitment, increase minorities attending college, we had to come up with Pell Grants and all kind of financial aid and scholarships and stuff in order to lower the financial burden that people would have. And so, to put yourself through the police academy is a financial burden, especially if you're doing it through the JC route and you're not being sponsored by a department. So, there's different things that can be done to increase recruitment, but then there's also things on the back end that I think we should be doing as a state and as a country, frankly, to make sure that when we hand a person a gun and say, hey, you're empowered to go out there and make life or death decisions, that there's stages. There has to be more in terms of, and the way I see it, you have to earn that opportunity. And I'm not saying that the training that they're going in now doesn't put them in line for that opportunity, but I don't think after coming out of the police academy and then, doing several weeks with your field training officer and then being set on your own, at that point, you should be making those decisions.
Mr. Bivens, could I jump in here? This Sheriff Withdraw. I agree with some that Mr. Pointer said and some not. We do have, we have cadet programs and things like that where we try and get kids interested, where we go from 14 years all the way up till they're 21, where they can be part of law enforcement, where they don't have a gun, interacting with the public. And as I've said, I changed the age to become a correctional officer to 18. Our correctional officers don't have firearms or anything like that. And I tell you, 30 plus years ago, I started in the jail, and I was a 25-year-old kid who was middle class and never been in a fight in my life other than on the basketball court. And so that was the best training ground ever to learn that that badge doesn't give me any strength at all. I had to learn to speak with people and interact with people and treat people with respect at all time, and if I expected them to treat me with respect. And so there is a lot we can do. I just want you to know there are avenues we have that people can be involved in law enforcement for a long time and gain that experience. And I realize you're absolutely right. That's how important it is to not have that tombstone courage, to interact and give respect to people, even if it's a hardened gang member or whatever, or somebody who's been a child molester or anything like that. It's not our job to judge. It's our job just to enforce the law and gather information and to interact with our community when we're not having to enforce the law. So we have avenues that way to make that happen. When I went to the academy years ago, it was only 16 weeks. Now it's 26 weeks. And when they hit the street, now they have to go through another 6 months of training with an officer in the car. And one thing that's concerning to me, I just want to throw this out here. I don't know where the NAACP's position is on this, but AB 89 has been introduced, and that law would require that somebody to come in law enforcement, they have a college degree and be 25 years of age. Well, I think that will really negatively impact major parts of our community that necessarily don't want to go on to college or have other skill sets, but would still be interested in law enforcement. So Assemblyman Weiner has introduced that bill, and it really worries me because, as Chief Jones said earlier, and I touched on it too, it is so difficult and it's such a long process right now to get somebody from the time they say that they want to become an officer through the background, through an academy. I mean, our washout rate is just astronomical. So out of 100, we probably end up with less than 10 people that could possibly even go to the academy. And then we wash them out in the academy, and then they get washed out on the training program. So I just want to be careful that we understand how difficult it is and how impactful it is when we're shorthanded out on the street. So we want to find that happy medium there, that again, that we're putting the best product out. And I'm hoping in our community with the new programs and stuff that we're starting to, as you said, it's the longer you're out there, the more you can get in trouble nowadays. And so we want to engage early and be mentors to young people to help them come along that path. And so when they get to the point where they want to get a job, they can choose any job that they want. They have the qualifications to do any job, not just law enforcement. And that's our goal. And so, but I think you brought out some great points.
Trina, thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you. And thank you, Sheriff Withrow. For sure, and I'm of the age that I remember the cadet programs and PAL programs, and it's twofold. I feel like our law enforcement, on the top of everything else we've talked about, has to do a major overhaul and almost marketing job. So while we're getting better, we need to start communicating that we're getting better. And I mean down to our children. During the King holiday, I had an opportunity to step in and supplement a class and talk about the history of civil rights and, you know, that whole bit. And it was a very fun time. And at the Q&A time, this was, by the way, with third graders. And at the Q&A time period, one little boy, Latino boy, says, a Latino, he said, but I never want to be a police officer. They kill Black people. That's what this little Latino boy said. And I said, oh, and I'm trying to gauge the teacher, how she want me to respond in this, because she's watching. And I says, well, that has unfortunately happened, but there are a lot of good officers, is what I said on the video thing with all the kids on there, and he came back and he says, yeah, but I'm never going to be one, and he went on to talk about how bad they were. And so the other kids, they're just nodding their head. And what God gave me to say, and I know it was God in the moment, because I was surprised that this was a strong reaction from kids at 9th grade, because the whole point of my presentation was nothing negative towards that. I was touting the fact that you still can be engaged civically. And at this point, what I said was, yes, but if only bad people want to be officers, what will that leave us? And then they kind of went, they thought about it. That little boy decided he still was going to be a Lego maker and not a police department. But the point being is that we do need to get back out into the community to make sure there is a PR job that has to happen. Our kids don't want to go into the programs. And in our schools, often that's not even an option or a choice that they have. And a while back, and Sheriff, you'll let me know if it's changed or not, for when we do the background checks and what have you, not just if you've been involved in gangs or violence or guns or any of those kind of things, if you've associated with anyone that's been known. Well, in our communities, that's who we associate with. It could have been your mom, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, the neighbor that we just started out playing jacks out front. So when you do the background check and that flag comes up, you're like, all of a sudden you're disqualified from the program. That has to be looked at as well to determine if indeed that still is a viable option, because of the over-policing, because of the cycles of trauma and all of the things that we know that happen in our community. What is the chances that we'll have a clean, targeted person that'll actually be able to make it through the system that some kind of way didn't touch anybody, didn't know anybody, didn't see anybody that had connections? It makes it hard. So I think that we first have to we have to clean up our act, like we've been talking about, like I think we want to do. We've got to fix some of the race issues, and we've got to actually act in the policy that has been set, and then put some more good policy on the books. And then we've got to get our kids to know our communities, yes. And we do need more people stepping up in community policing and using their voices and all of that. Thank you for the interaction, riding around, talking to the people in the street, all of that. We've got to get our kids to know that this is a profession of integrity and that they are fair. We've got to do a better PR job. We've got to fix that. You can't have brokenness and then just stop having the things that didn't work. You've got to go above and beyond to now undo the trauma of the past and fix what's in people's minds so that the kids will want to participate. So should they get a cadet program, a PAL program in their school, they won't sit back and say, I ain't doing that, man, that's the cops. I don't ever want to be a cop. They actually actually will participate in the programs. And then once we stop excluding people based on who they know, then perhaps they can become a police. So that's a lot of ifs and whats, but it's the battle and the challenge that we're up against. And it's not just as easy saying more people go sign up. And I agree with you. I don't know about that whole college thing. I think that just excludes even more of us once we find someone that fits all of the other qualifications.
Pastor Turner, you're so dead on right there. I want to put you at ease a little bit. We don't just exclude people at our department, and we have family members and friends and who have been in things that they shouldn't have been in, and so we are taking a deep dive to make sure that everybody makes mistakes. We're looking for human beings. I find the best officers are the ones who've had stuff happen to them in their lives and have gone through things and learned through it, come out the other side and changed. And we have certain laws that keep us from, if there's a felony conviction or something like that. But that's what the DA was talking about, how when we start expunging these type of low-level offenses in the past, and that's not exculpatory for us as much anymore. So we really dive into people's character and the type of people they are. And we want those people who have that life experience, because it just makes them better cops on the street, to be honest with you. And I think you're absolutely dead on that. And I really hope, because it can't be me standing in front of young Black boys and girls saying, hey, come be a cop. It has to be the Black community that is saying, hey, look, bad things happen. We know that, but we've got to make this change from within. And not all cops are bad. And when you need help, they're going to be there for you. And they have to have confidence to know, well, then if they come across a bad one, that the guys sitting at the top are going to do something about it, or the gals sitting at the top are going to do something about it to correct the problem. So I think you're dead on there.
Well, I did my 30-second commercial. I did.
And I want to thank you both for that dialogue right there. And it is important, and many of us are engaged in trying to do that. But as Trina said, there needs to be a major PR program related to law enforcement and the judicial system. And hopefully we can get together and talk about how to work with the judges and the courts in a better way, so that the outcomes are not so negative. At this point in time, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give us a 1-minute closing statement, thought or suggestion, recommendation, because we're coming close to our bewitching hour. I want to thank you for this dialogue, your participation and the comments. And I want to thank Santa Monica for being here with us too. I told you Ms. Landry would straighten me out. She did. Okay, so let's start out. We started out with the chief. Let's start out at the back end. Bishop, give us I know it's going to be hard because you're a preacher. But,
no, I'm the new school preacher. I don't preach long at all. But what I will say is, change is going to come. I'm very hopeful that change is on the horizon, and I don't want us to just continue to magnify the negative. We have to begin to start speaking positive, and then in so doing, speaking positive, we have to continue to do what we're doing today. And I'm so glad that Ms. Torrey is online, and Sheriff Withrow, Chief Jones was on. And being able to sit down and have this roundtable discussion about and talking about these hard issues that are very, very relevant and very real. But the more we sit down and talk, the more we discuss, the more we brainstorm, the more we iron sharpeneth iron from a biblical perspective, I think we'll see a lot of great and positive things. But if we continue to do what we've always done, we're going to always get what we've always got. So let's continue and move in this positive direction. Let's keep the dialogue going. Let's continue to bring our community leaders to the table, along with our government officials, police officials, and let's continue to talk about how we can better our city, because change is going to come. And I'm very hopeful, walking in faith, that change is going to come. So thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. Pastor Trina.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for this opportunity. What I want to say in closing, and I saw in some of the lines, people talking about, different opportunities or alternatives. And I want to say call Stockton, CALL Stockton is a new program that we've already sat down and talked with the city manager and with Chief Jones about. We need to also get with you, Sheriff Withrow, and talk to others, but it's a program that's emulated after a program called Cahoots in Springfield and I think Eugene, Oregon. It gives another non-police first response. Our police do have a whole lot that they're dealing with. When they show up at a call, they don't know what they're showing up for. And Melinda, I saw you talked about law enforcement officers seem to need to be social workers, mental health workers, legal experts, tactical response experts. Call Stockton actually will give another opportunity. Do you need fire? Do you need ambulance? Do you need police? Or a fourth option? I need right now response, but it does not need to be a police response. And so we're working on that now, Faith in the Valley, with some other community partners that would actually be able to show up with mental health professionals that would not require an emergency response from a police officer. And it's one that I think will greatly benefit our community. And I'm hoping to expand it throughout the Central Valley. Nothing that we're going to respond to, but we will have the right qualified professionals. It's just a system. So it's called Call Stockton. I want you to please keep your ears tuned to it. We can make it fit for Stockton, but I think it will make a world of difference in how our officers can then receive relief from what they're having to show up with, and then show up at times when they need to better prepare to handle the situation for which they've been called. God bless you. Thank you for having me on.
That was a long ministerial commercial. So you're going to have to send us $1,000 check for that commercial. All right, let's go to Dante.
I'll just conclude. First of all, this conversation is important. I was very encouraged to see not only the community show up, but also the leaders of law enforcement within the Central Valley. That's very important that everybody's at the table, because it can't be a one-sided conversation no matter which side you're on. It's always easy to win an argument when the other side is silent, or it's just a one-sided argument or a one-sided discussion. And so we have feedback. I saw people interacting, and that's a good thing. And frankly, there's more positive thoughts, at least in my position, that came out of this as it relates to what's actively being done to address the problems that are in policing today. I just know that there's a long road, and while we have a good conversation, it also has to be followed up with just as committed to having the type of acts that are consistent with the conversations we had here today. So, I look forward to working with any and everybody on this issue moving forward. I'm happy for the NAACP to step in a leadership position to put together the proverbial table for everybody to come to. And if I can ever be any help, let me know and I'll be there to help. Thank you guys for having me here today.
Thank you for being with us. And as you know, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Sheriff Withrow.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. It was to be honest, I was a little nervous about being here after the verdict last week or earlier this week, and so but it's so important, and I'm so happy I was here, and we had just some great dialogue here. Some great suggestions came for it as far as with hiring and getting some other eyes on that process. I think that's fantastic. And Pastor Turner, it was a pleasure listening to you and everyone that was involved here, Mr. Pointer and everyone. And I got to let you know that Tori Verber Salazar, I don't know if she's still on or not, the DA. I don't want to steal her thunder, but just earlier this week, did a presentation on the program that you're speaking about, where mental health officials can respond and instead of law enforcement. And we have always wanted that. We keep when they don't have anybody else to call, they call us, and then we're supposed to solve the problems, and we just don't have all those skill sets all the time. So and having a uniform and a gun on scene sometimes and many times inflames it. So we're looking forward to that, and some type of program here locally to make that happen. And Mr. Bivens, thank you so much for putting this together, and it was a great dialogue. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. And it sounds like we should change your name instead of the Sheriff's Office, the NAACP Auxiliary, because when people have no place else to go, they come to us. That's why we have to deal with you. Tori, you get the last word.
Oh, well, thank you so very much. Powerful conversation. I learned a great deal, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity. And I want to tell you, I'm very fortunate. When I say the chief, I mean the chief and the sheriff. Sometimes I don't always work both those words in, but all the chiefs and the sheriffs are working collaboratively. And we have very tough, difficult conversations. People don't realize that we're all very committed and passionate. We're all very, trying to build internally offices that reflect our community and the values that we all hold to be true. And there are times when we really are coming at each other from different perspectives. I am the person that will prosecute their employee. And yet we come to the table every month. And every month they let me come back, which is great. But they let me come to the table with them, and we work collaboratively. And we don't always agree, but the door is always open, and they're always willing to listen to me, and I try to always listen to them. And both Pat and I have in our budgets these kind of tools that will allow us to do co-responding. We're looking at co-responding on family violence. There is a great deal of misdemeanor cases that traditionally are mandated by law that have to come. So every one of those officers has to document, everyone has to be sent to my office, and everyone has to be evaluated. We're looking at that mechanism and forming a partnership with the sheriff and chiefs to do a co-responding so that we would have victim advocates. Officers would go in initially, and then our healing would start real time, or near real time, I should say, and our officers could move on. And this is for low level misdemeanor, type of family harm. And we're looking at doing the same mechanism with and Pastor Trina, and we're working on it right now. And it's in my budget, it's in Pat's budget. We're asking for a significant amount of resources to go to these areas that we can do. So we're not just talking about it, it's already in our budgets, it's been submitted. We're begging the Board of Supervisors for those resources right now, to have those tools that we hope to be able to roll out in 21, to do the co-responding mechanism to better address those with mental health, substance use, and unhoused and family violence. We don't want to arrest people that are ill. We don't want to incarcerate people that are ill. There are times when we will have to, because they will have created such a harm on our society that we have to bring them in. But most of the time, we're bringing them in because there is no other resource. Where do we take them? As I always say, by a 911 call, every system has failed. And then you call 911 to fix every problem. And we haven't given them all the tools that they need and all the support that they need to do so. Their lane is really looking at violent crime, people that are in a place in their life and in their journey where they're not making good and healthy decisions. And there's going to be some form of engagement. But what do we do with everybody else? And that's the conversations that we had for hours on Wednesday and on every third Wednesday of the month, is what do we do and how do we do? Because I think the misconception is that we want it this way. We do not. We don't want harm. We don't want trauma. We want to help to heal. And we want to stay in our area of expertise and do what we do and do it well and to the best of our abilities. So, but we can't do it without you. And the same journey that they're on is that we're all on as a nation. It's not just law enforcement that we're doing the self-reflection on our past history and our contribution to racism and the problems that we have driven and called upon, but as a nation, we're doing it. And we can't do it without each other. So we appreciate these opportunities and these conversations. And I'm grateful to the partnerships that I have with law enforcement, because I do see the courageous conversations, but I see even more than that. I see them driving solutions and making the changes. So thank you, President, and thank you, NAACP, for this opportunity.
Thank you, and thank you all. And of course, Sheriff, we'll be circling back around with you since it's been a year to talk about a citizens oversight committee of some sort with the Sheriff's Department. And hopefully we've had a year to look at things, and you'll be bringing us a cup of cocoa as we have this conversation so we can share some love. And with that, I want to say I want to thank our member Constance Smith that called me up and said, "Hey, let's do this. We just had another situation, and psychologically, everybody needs to have some conversation and dialogue." So I'm calling it out. Thank you, Constance, for promoting, pushing me to do this again. And as I said at the beginning, it's been 1 year exactly since we had it last year, and it's 1 year since we presented our 10-point plan. And of course, Stockton PD has adopted a part of it. And Sheriff, I have not followed back up with you, and it's time for us to do that. I wanted to give you a little bit more time in your seat. Now we can dialogue on that, and hopefully the seat won't feel so hot. At any rate, thank you. And at this point, I want to ask for a 10-minute extension on our time for the meeting so that we can handle just a few items of business. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this, got something out of it, learned something, and you can put your comments in the chat to let us know so that we can follow back up with you if we need to do that, or if you need to have some of your questions followed up with with our panelists today. So to the panelists, thank you, thank you, thank you. Can I get a motion for a 10-minute extension of our meeting time?
President Bivens, I move that the meeting be extended 5 minutes.
Second.
Man, how am I working? I have a motion for a 5-minute extension. Can I get?
I second the motion.
Yeah. Would you say you second the motion?
Yes, Shirley Washington.
Okay, and did I hear somebody say that we need to go 10 minutes and not 5?
Aye.
All right. Thank you, Shirley, for the amendment to the motion. Anyway, all those in favor vote by the sign of aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, thank you. We will now go back to our agenda, and we will have a brief statement on our finances from the treasurer, whom we missed earlier. So we just need the treasurer statement.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Deborah Sullivan speaking on the Treasury. The Treasury report has been done, and if there's any questions, please make an appointment with me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And our minutes were not presented. However, if we could stick them on the screen for about a minute or so and have a motion one way or the other. Madam, I don't know if can you do that, Gloria?
No, I can't. The hosts have to share mine. I can't
Ms.
share.
Gloria, Ms. Gloria, you have co-host privileges at this time if you would like to share screen.
What's that?
Didn't quite understand what you said because you got two computers going.
President, can we approve them next time?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay,
I'll
good.
accept that. All right. And quickly, Luana, can you give us a 30-second overview on the housing grant, rental grant program that we're engaged in, trying to help people in the community? And then, Brandon, if you can share the screen on those while she's talking, that would be great.
Yes, good morning. Just quickly, we'd like to remind the NAACP membership and all of our participants today that the Stockton branch NAACP is partnering with El Concilio and the city of Stockton to bring an emergency housing program. And we want to encourage you, if you are a homeowner or that has rental property, you want to become aware of the emergency rental assistance program being offered through the city. There's a deadline to apply, which is April 30th. We have our volunteers going door to door and also doing mailings to our churches and to targeted areas where people of color live. We want to get this out into our community so that they can take apart, have this information, and know that there are funds available to assist with the emergency rental program, as well as a program for past due rent and utilities. So please, please, we will put the flyer in the chat. And if you need this information, please go to the site that is listed on the flyer. Thank you very much. The only other announcement that I have, President, is regarding the youth meeting tomorrow. Our youth in the NAACP Stockton Youth Council will be continuing the conversation regarding policing, but they will be having, if you could put the flyer up, please, they will be having this discussion with the United States Attorney. It's going to be a very informative program. Our youth will be talking about policing, their reflections as a result of the verdict. And so please join us, parents. We encourage you to participate as well as we have this discussion tomorrow, Sunday, 2 p.m. with our designated United States Attorney. Thank you very much, President Bivens.
Okay, are there any more brief announcements that anyone would like to bring forward? I want to say congratulations to Pastor Trina and Bishop Turner. They'll be celebrating the church's 26th, I believe I'm saying it right, the church's 26th anniversary tomorrow starting at 4 p.m.
We're celebrating it tonight at 7 p.m. and then tomorrow 9 a.m. and we're having a banquet at 4 p.m.
Is it open to the public?
Yeah, tonight is open to the public. Sunday morning's open to the public. The banquet is open to the public with a $25 fee for tickets. And I think there's a few left.
Okay. Thank you very much, Pastor Trina. Any other announcements that anyone would like to make? I want to say it's very good to see our former Register of Voters that has worked very closely with the NAACP, Melinda Dubroff. We still love you. We want you to stay engaged with us, and it's great to see you here today. And you too as well, Sheriff Moore. It's good to see your name. I can't see your face, but and he is a life member, so but I haven't seen him in a good little while since COVID's been going on. So thank you for being here, former Sheriff Moore. Any other announcements? Any other announcements this month? We did have our one-day convention on the resolutions, and I will share with you that the Stockton branch's 10-point plan was forwarded as a resolution to the national office for be a resolution to come before the body addressing policing, police reform. And as I said earlier in the meeting, the mayor of the city manager of Stockton has put in place a 25-member police oversight committee addressing these issues. And we've been covering almost now since last October, many of these issues and getting some very good information. And now we're at the point, I believe, at our next meeting is in June, that we need to talk about implementing, since we have all the data and all the information, it's time for some action changes to take place in the policing, in the city policing programs and activities, as well as trying to get the sheriff to get engaged and to do a similar kind of thing for the county of San Joaquin. So I just wanted to bring that up, and we'll bring those things up next meeting. Any other comments, announcements? If not, I will ask Deacon Bobby Jones to close us out in prayer once we get a motion to adjourn.
President Bivens, this is Brandon Thorne. I motion that we adjourn the meeting for today.
There's a second?
Luana Bivens, second.
Yeah, you would. Okay, all right. Deacon Bobby Jones, let's close us out in prayer.
Oh, precious Heavenly Father, in your holy and wonderful name, oh God. Lord, your word to tell us how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity, oh God. And God, we thank you for every suggestion, every comment, and everything, hallelujah, that was suggested here today, oh God, it can be used to your glory. And we thank you, oh God, for all that was said today and all that was done. God, we thank you for being in the midst. We thank you for this day that you have made, oh God. And as we leave this place, but not from your presence, oh God, we pray for your blessings to be upon us, even the sick ones, even the ones in the hospital, oh God. We thank you. We bless your holy and your wonderful name. In Jesus' name we pray and we say, amen. Thank you, Jesus.
Amen.
Thank you, Deacon Jones. I'll call, the meeting is over. If there are any of you that are outside of the city of